Thank, thank you so much, Isaac. So first of all, I want to thank everyone for being here. Everybody joining from the audience, but also our panelists today. So this panel actually came to be as a follow-up to a very successful session that we had at GALA that I did appreciate a lot, and we got a lot of other people who showed interest and appreciation. Kirti, I think that got us started on this conversation about what the concept of a headless TMS could look like, and that is exactly what I'm hoping that we can uncover together today. It's this is right now maybe a concept. This is something that a lot of people don't know what it is. But some people might also be already working with headless TMS and not necessarily be aware of it. So we're going to try to work through the different parts of understanding this concept, seeing where it lives at the moment, how it is evolving, and who can adopt this type of model. So we have agreed on a few questions, but we're going to give our speakers a lot of liberties to show their own point of view, their own experience, and hopefully, and I have been encouraging them very strongly to disagree on what headless TMS might look like. So I think that to set the stage, I want to share one quote that is what got me thinking and thinking about having this conversation. And again, thank you, GALA, for giving us the platform to actually do this. So let me share for a second my screen here. When I didn't know much about what a headless TMS might look like, this quote actually helped me quite a bit. Hopefully you can see my screen here. This is a quote from Kirti. I'm going to read it out loud. A headless TMS would not force you to go through the TMS to access, use, or redeploy linguistic assets, only through a TMS, and let other apps access, add, or modify linguistic asset data directly. What this means for us is that the linguistic assets become a cross-organizational resource rather than a resource just for localization and project management. So the whole point about this conversation is changing the way that we look at the pieces that make up a TMS and how they are mostly consumed and accessed only by us practitioners of localization, and open them up to more areas of an organization, and also open them up to be transformed, used, consumed, shared through a number of other applications, so that basically we break this this concept of the TMS that we have into something different. How that's going to look like, that's what our panelists are going to help us unfold today. So I think that one way to phrase this or to frame this conversation is, let's think what we know about what a TMS is, right? And I want to propose that we think as a TMS in the traditional sense as something like wall server. So hopefully this is a product that we've all been exposed to. It's a very large, powerful, comprehensive, and solid TMS type of application that we had been using in the industry for well over 2 decades at least, right? It is a household name, and so many companies just run around that TMS. It has all the features that you ever wanted to have. So I want to just question in our panel, why would something like that no longer be the right answer? Why that is not solving all the needs from customers? What has changed, or what needs to be different? So maybe István, you can say a first word about that.
Sure, thank you. So basically, with something like World Server, there was a good understanding around relatively large and unchanging projects. And the way that the whole thing is set up is that throughout the supply chain, there is a lot of work to be done when you want to process the World Server packages or just want to reassign everything. So these days, there is a lot of code getting generated. There is a lot of text. There is also the hyper personalization coming up, which is generating more jobs than ever. And these jobs at times need to be done in a human way, or like with human translators, and other times it needs to be done with like in a machine way. And sometimes it's not even like just machine translation, but machine transcreation, if you like. So what I think is that something as big as World Server has been very essential for enterprises, but in the current way, when all the different applications are getting much more niche, this is not really serving a purpose.
Right. Thank you so much. Johan, what's your take?
Yeah.
And by the way, I mean no harm or no disrespect to World Server. So like I said, it is out there making people successful every day. We're just trying to think about how things have changed and how we look at things different. Sorry, Johan.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Okay, should we then perhaps rephrase it so we talk about traditional TMSs? Because that perhaps then we embrace more of these different solutions that are out there. And I think that the challenge for me is really that these solutions, they are proprietary. And that means that we somehow lock in our data somewhere. And I think that this is the challenge for me, because we also see a lot of, as István said, we see a lot of data streaming through other types of channels. How can we enable from my perspective, how can we reach our coworkers and customers faster with a smallest price tag? That's really what we are looking for. And how can we do that then in a different way? So this is really for me, how can we change this process? So this is my take on it. Kirti, your take?
Yeah, so the problem I see with the old style TMS systems is they bind the linguistic assets, the processing flow, and the workflows together very tightly. And they assume a human chain process. You know, they're largely designed around a human translation chain process. So they tie everything together, and it's very hard to get access to the linguistic assets for new kinds of applications that are emerging all the time now. Things like ChatGPT or new forms of machine translation that work differently. So in the modern era, I think you need to have a much more abstracted sense of the linguistic assets. So you have translation memory that becomes a universal resource that can be used by many kinds of applications, including those that are not really translation process applications. They just become a resource for ChatGPT, for example, or for adaptive MT, so that they can be easily repurposed for new kinds of applications. Also, I think a lot of the old TMS systems are designed around client-server architectures, where there's a different view of control and management. I think the new views are much more around microservices and API-driven and service-oriented architectures, where different components are linked together to solve a specific business problem. And so they're much more able, much more flexible in linking into mainstream IT systems, because translation now is all over the organization. It's not a localization function anymore. And openness is a very key requirement. A lot of the traditional TMS systems and even some of the new modern cloud-based ones are very closed. It's very hard to get access to linguistic assets, which make them, I think, problematic in terms of just, if the objective is to increase international revenue, to provide better communication and services to your global customers, these kinds of systems become an impediment rather than an assistant. And so I think those are sort of the big problems I see, and why, and hopefully I gave some kind of a view on why you want to do new things. And and as István mentioned, we used to have this translate, edit, proof process. It is now much more varied. It can be a machine-to-machine communication, where you just pull data from Twitter, you look at what customers are saying about your product, and then you summarize, and the customers are talking in many languages, and you summarize key positives and key negatives so that product managers and marketing people look at that and decide on, how do we need to change content on the web? How do we need to change the messaging we give to a customer? So there's a lot more sophisticated translation related functions happening now. So the old translate, edit, proof workflows don't work as well, in these new settings where there's much more fast flowing data.
So I'm gonna ask you in a second about what it is that then a system should look like, but I'm gonna go off the script for a second and just because you mentioned something that I think is like very scary, and maybe I want to hear your take from all of you on this. You said taking TMs and sharing them with the organization at large, and that is something that we've been taught not to do, right? We've been like very protective of TMs as a very delicate and valuable asset that could break or get contaminated or just be misused if we share it with other people, even within our own organizations. Is that a concern anymore, or has that also changed? Can we really aspire to go and open up our TMSs, our super valuable TMs, sorry, not TMSs, TMs, with the rest of our teams?
Do we dare not to?
If they can use it.
Yeah,
and
I mean, looking at a TM, a TM is a fragment, it's a segment with metadata. And then it's, of course, how do we use the metadata and make that available so that people know that this can be used here and there? It's actually up to us to serve them. So I would like to turn that question to see that usually, as Kirti talks about, we talk about this as linguistic assets. And it has one data part where we have the metadata and how we use it in relation to other solutions. And we have the actual, should we call it the linguistic part, where actually people can see and how use it into context. And we need to give them the opportunity to actually use this text. I think that is where we have the great benefit and why we actually make the data and the text usable.
I wonder if then that means that we need to elevate our practice to get those clean up, because in many cases we use them knowing that there will be like the criteria from someone who has like some linguistic knowledge and will make the right decisions, right? Not all TMs are like clean and free of errors. So I just wonder, is that something that we can like get over and just go and use them, because it's better to have all of these advantages, open it up, use them widely, as opposed to like be very concerned that someone will misuse them.
Quality is a piece of metadata, isn't it? So like how you trust a certain piece of data, that's also something that you can put there, and like the other person can know whether to use it or for what purposes to use it. For training machine translation, why not? Because some mismatch is not going to make a big problem.
Mm-hmm.
So, giving others in the organization access to translation memory does not mean that we just throw it out into the wild. It means there is a more open attitude to sharing, certain assets that could be useful to marketing, to product management, to engineering, to help them create new assets that help customers. So it is still a managed process. It's still a managed asset, with maybe localization people having overall oversight, but the doors to the access to the data become much more transparent. They don't have to learn how to use World Server or any translation management system to touch the data. It is a resource that can be accessed using an API. There's an audit trail, so there's ways to do in service-oriented architectures that have been sort of at the heart of banking and retail and all these organizations where data is flowing really rapidly. There are very clear handoff processes. There are very clear oversight and management and audit trails around it. So I think the same kinds of things could be done here. but not if you have, the kind of traditional TMS perspective where you are in control of everything and nothing happens without you going through, through the TMS interface. I think that is sort of the heart of what headless TMS is talking about. And, and what these guys who are talking about language operations as well, they're basically just saying that let's make linguistic data usable, leverageable where it's needed. And, rather than trap it in one single system and, then confine its use only through this very systematic process. And I think the need is for more open access because the world is much more dynamic, things move much faster, and more people need access.
Yeah. And I like to take from what you just said. Sorry, Johan. Just a quick note. I like to take that in passing, we have mentioned one opportunity for us, which is as this opens up, as these assets are shared with more people, we're still the guys from localization, globalization, whatever your name is and your function is called. We have an opportunity to actually be at the helm of that governance and that control, best practices. So even as we are talking about language, large language models, and we're talking about new uses of our data, we do have a role to play in that governance. So I think that that's a great takeaway for the audience. And just quick note, we might get instances of headless, seamless, pointless, sleepless, powerless, and now heartless. So we thought about all of these names for this, and we came to agree that they all worked in one way or another. So be ready; they might slip through again. Sorry, Johan.
Yeah, but I was just thinking about this, that the assets that we have, to make them available to many. I think that if you switch to my second slide, Jose.
Yep, coming up.
Yep. I forgot one thing also in relation to what you mentioned just. Because I really come from what I think that where we can see an upskilling needed is really that when we talk about the linguists, it's really about, now you're sharing your preview, I think. Doesn't matter.
It's okay.
It works. But I think that what needed of upskilling among our linguists about where our PMs, our log PMs and so on, is really to go into the data intelligence area. How do I learn more about data? How do I understand data? How can I use it better? Because I had an animation there on the capability slide, because for me, then coming from machine translation, understanding what we needed to improve translation, what we needed to build translation to make incremental changes, really were the questions that we built up this capability on, that we had glossaries, we had feedback loops, we can make that by AI or whatever, human, whatever you can do it. But really, when we then looked into when we need to look into TMSs, it's really about that they keep these capabilities too. And now if you had clicked the button, Jose, there would be an animation there. No, it doesn't work. No. Because then I would say, no, you'd go back. Because that slide, because it's really about the animation was going to be that these boundaries has now vanished. And what we can see is that the glossaries, they are similar to the TMs or other aligned items. And that is for me really the question is then that really that we see that things merge, that the two solutions all know they don't need to be separated anymore. They can be one, but they need to find a place to be one. So that is my take on it.
So, sorry. Go ahead.
Sorry, and I think that you hit the nail on the head with this separation, because when talking about, let's say, word server, this comes from an era when an enterprise wanted to have one system covering their specific domain. There was a lot of enterprise silos, and basically the localization team wanted to own the whole localization. Whereas now a lot of things are happening at a much higher speed. And with first the introduction of machine translation, procurement has learned that there is not a single system. that localization needs. There can be a combination of systems. So this has led to those different boundaries vanishing, in my view.
All right. So glad that you took my office script, wrote and run with it. So I really appreciate that. There might be more of that coming. So why don't we go and try and represent for people what is a headless TMS? So what are the components and what is the flow of information? Let's try and give people like some example of how this could look like. We always talk about the functions that it will have and the benefits that it will have, but how do they look like? And maybe we can just provide some examples at the same time. So we want to give that a try. So maybe Kirti, do you want to start with this?
Yeah, sure. So I mean, I don't think there's a single vision of what a headless TMS is. You know, there's already a couple of discussions in the industry. Language ops is also an attempt to try and put some definition around this. But I think it starts with a focus on translation is something that enables international business. And the role of these systems and assets is to support the management and delivery of multilingual global customer experience. So I think step one is an independent management of linguistic assets. So they become a universal resource, a managed and controlled, but still a universal resource, easily accessible through APIs, service-oriented architectures, microservices, kinds of processes for, you know, customer-oriented functions where they add value. It easily incorporates new AI. So now we have ChatGPT and maybe new other kinds of things coming. There's some of these large language models can have context windows that are as big as a book. You know, there's one that's, I forget the total number of tokens. I think it's 100,000 tokens or 1 million tokens. So that's the size of the Harry Potter book. You know, so it can use that as context in the task it performs. And maybe it's just a question the customer is asking about, how does your product work? But you can use that and make it available in 20 languages so that that becomes a much more powerful, you know, AI-enabled process. It allows much more human and machine-based process workflow setup. It makes it very easy to do. You know, it's not like only designed around a human process and not, you know, useful for much more automated workflows. Provides, you know, the things that we all want, monitor and report on key performance indicators, on how timely this translation stuff is happening, how good the quality is, you know, what is the cost. It gives you oversight over all of that as well. And it allows you to connect to new sources of information where there's translation-worthy data. Whether it's human-based or whether it's automated becomes less important. It is more a function of, is it useful to a customer? Is it useful to make more data available to the customer? And what we're learning is that through the pandemic and through the kinds of changes that the pandemic has introduced is that you need a much more substantial digital presence. And digital presence means a lot more content, a lot more communication, a lot more dynamic interaction with customers. And, you know, as Johan mentioned, translation memory today is very like project-based and job-based. I think it needs to be much richer metadata has to be around it so that it can be shared in a more intelligent way where, you know, the data management perspective on translation memory needs to evolve to like, okay, this is for these kinds of functions, but it came from here. This is the quality rating. You know, it has multiple layers of metadata around it so that it can be redeployed in new work processes and new workflows in a more sophisticated way. So, I mean, you know, these are, I think, the elements that you need. They're not available in any individual product available in the market today. So, you know, it's an evolution right now. We're at the state where we're saying these are the things that look like we, you know, make sense. And, you know, who's going to step up and do that?
So just on the headless concept, I want to share this one, just in case some people don't know where the headless part comes from, and we are taking this from Adobe and how they represent Headless TMS, which is the headless one that I think that most of us are familiar with, where basically you do replace the one UI with APIs, and then instead of delivering through one type of output, you do it directly into many different places. So if I understand it correctly, we're talking about like a similar approach where people author or translate in one place, and that information then flows through APIs to many different uses and many different other systems where it might be published and be delivered, or they may go through further transformations and then move on to as many uses or steps as we need in our content processing. Does that sound right?
Yeah, I think it's an abstraction of core assets to make it more available across every international communication or data sharing requirement in a big company.
Right. So István, do you want to speak to how would this look like in real life?
I just wanted to say that I think like one part where we did not have a full agreement within the group here is like what components this needs to contain. And I think that there is one piece of agreement, which is like language data needs to be made accessible, which is like some language assets, some language repository. And I actually been involved. So the idea is not new. I've been involved in this, creating a tool called TM repository back in 2010. Back then it was called Kilgrey, now it's called MemoQ. It was then later open source, then it was discontinued completely. The whole idea already then was the metadata-based tagging of translation memories, because there needs to be some kind of a tidiness to this in order to make it usable. But what companies do today, and why this is, I think, the right time to come up with something like that, like separating the language data, is that every company is pushing out the data into data lakes. And basically from the data lakes, it's possible to mix and match, to combine everything that's out there for the best possible purposes. So it is removing the silos between the different departments. And like if it has a translation interface or not, if it has like a translation workflow, or that's only just working with the data that is in this data repository, that's a separate question. But I think translation is very central because it is the one place where there is record from various areas of the company. So if you're, for example, building something like a chatbot or some kind of a knowledge, a company knowledge, most of the stuff that's important, especially for the customer, has gone through translation, even in relatively small companies. So I think that's interesting because there is a lot of applications that you can use, that you can do with the data that is available through the previous translations.
So I think that we're like at a very high level here. Can we talk about like some? Can someone like walk us through a process, like maybe some sort of like content process that and name what steps would be making that up? So with whatever component you think that would fit this type of workflow. So again, we had like that example with publishing content for web and multiple platforms with Adobe. How would it look like for a translation team? Can you walk us through from the content gets created somewhere, it gets transformed in this way, or goes into that other step? Do we have like a real application even that we can talk about? Something that already exists or that you have, that you're doing at the moment that resembles a headless TMS? You love it when I go off script, I know.
The challenge, I think, is that what we have done in the last 3 years is that we have implemented a traditional structure. But what we are also doing is that we are doing a huge amount outside the structure. And what I see now is that what we need to is to bring them together. And I think I made that in a slide, but I don't care. It was really about them merging the MT with the TMSs, that we see that we need to merge this now into an asset. It's actually a huge data lake. with metadata that people should be able to access. And I'm thinking that if I think about this, it's really about that people can access this by a chatbot or whatever. I need to translate this. Okay, fine. How? What do you need? And they can assemble it. And of course, this the step from them actually say I need to create the content is very, very narrow. But just to not get into that discussion, I will not mention it. So whatever you said, what I said in the last 20 seconds, I have not said it.
So,
So
go ahead.
but really, I think also, but then the people then of course will ask me, okay, you are a huge organization, you have probably the engineers to do this. But I think that this can really be something that can be very simple because we're looking at open source, we look into built-in open applications, we look at things that you can build on your own, like low code and everything that you can actually use to build these kind of solutions yourself. I mean, there are possibilities to build your own in-context reviews if you want to have it. You can build all these kinds of mixing together and build the different microservices that you need that could combine it. I don't have this in reality, so, but yeah. It's soon to be there.
Jose, there is an example that I'm aware of that Translated is involved with. That's Airbnb. This is a company that translates 5 to 10 billion words a month and does not have a translation management system because the sheer volume and scale of what they're doing and the range and scope of translation activities that are involved are so great that any kind of translation management interaction would only slow down and reduce the availability of translated data across the organization. So, for example, they have listings of properties that you might want to rent. So there's a certain kind of structure to that. There's a certain kind of linguistic property to that. That needs a human plus machine optimization process to make happen. And it's a much more human engaged element there. Then there's user reviews and just property reviews of people who have been to a property and then have some opinions about it. And the language there is much more unstructured. There's lots of spelling errors. So there's things that have to happen, with the analysis of that language before you can translate it and, make it available instantly in all the 60, 70 languages that they make data available. And then there's also dynamic real-time stuff. I want to rent a property in Croatia and I have a handicapped member in the family. There's no mention of this anywhere in the property listing. So I start communicating with the owner of the property saying, is there a ramp? Is it easy access? Is there, what kind of bathrooms do you have? There are very specific questions I might have around the accessibility and, availability for handicapped people in a specific property. So there's all these multiple layers of translation-related functions happening because, the conversation could be happening between English and Croatian, or it could be between Japanese and Croatian. There are very different kinds of possibilities available there. And the technology needs to be able to handle the kind of flow that happens here.
But why doesn't just like a sophisticated TMS do not support that? So can we just have all of this content repositories that you describe just be connected through integrations, right? We've been doing for a long time, and we got great at. Can we just have those that content flowing through and being pushed in the TMS for translation and then deliver them where they need to be? What is broken here? Why do we need a different solution? And what do they have, people like that, if they don't have a TMS in place? Where does it go? Where does the information live? Where does it get translated or reviewed by the human component?
Yeah, so they use a headless TMS system that Translated provides to large customers that's not available for sale in general, but it has this abstraction of translation memory, of human translation work processes, of data analysis and optimization for translation. It has a number of these components that could be, it's not that it's not possible for a modern TMS to do this, but they don't. most of the modern TMS, even the most, the cloud-focused ones that are in the news currently, are very restrictive in the way they give you access to the data. I think MemoQ is one of the most open ones, interestingly, even though it's one of the oldest ones, but because they originally had this TMS repository concept in their view of the world, the modern ones is like, let's control everything, and anything to do with translation, we have to pull it in and we manage it from here on. Is it possible for modern TMS systems to do all the things we're talking about? Yeah, it is possible, but they're not doing it. And this is why someone who does translation on the scale that Airbnb does not use a TMS system, and they have opted to use something that we call Translation OS. It's a headless TMS that allows these pieces to interact and engage directly with Airbnb IT systems, so that they don't need to go through any kind of TMS, typical TMS infrastructure, where it might take 3 seconds, you might affect latency by just enough that a customer would be, disgruntled by, why do I have 5 seconds to just send a message to the buyer? Why can't it just happen in real time? Why can't I just chat with them? These are the requirements of modern businesses.
So, and I see a question that I think is really relevant on the chat, which is, what is the problem with having a UI or having a front end? Is that what is getting in the way, or what is it that we're fighting? Are we fighting like an infrastructure that doesn't change? So when I go and I use TMS X, it can only do Y, and it will stay like that for a number of time. And I would rather have a bunch of like Lego blocks that I can align and that I can like pick and choose and change. Or is it that it's like someone's technology, or is it that it's just slow? What is it? What is the problem with even like having a UI for it? Again, what is the main problem that will slow us down or trap us? István.
I think sometimes the problem is that you cannot build your own UI. Because for certain kind of people, you need certain kind of user interfaces. I mean, just think about the customer portals. How many of your internal customers love those customer portals that the TMSs provide? And like the other thing with the UI, which I find sometimes a little bit scary, is that at the moment, I don't know of any single TMS in the market that allows the user to specify that a person cannot touch a project. When a project manager is coming in, and I've seen continuous localization workflows break just because somebody was putting the legal stuff in there, and then of course they have done something which was like not in line with the previous ones. And this is a problem with our industry when you want to go like low code, no code. I mean, low code, no code is great. Platform as a service is great, but then you start going into the error handling, and when errors can be introduced like 55 different ways into one workflow, just because somebody thought that was the great idea to change something there, then all of this effort is going to be 15 times more. So that is something that I've seen many times, that the problem with the user interface is exactly that it gives freedom. Whereas when it comes to very structured applications of the translation assets, then you don't necessarily want to allow this kind of a freedom. You want it to work, you want it to scale. And that's also, this is the reason why also the traditional TMSs are slow for the use case that Kirti has mentioned regarding Airbnb, because it's built to make so many things, so it cannot avoid being slow.
And another thing I'd like to add there is that the complexity, these big TMSs, they are built to manage everything. And that means that you need to configure them in such a way that it's like, as usual, when you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. So I think that is the challenge, that we then need to configure them. And when something needs to change, You can't change it because you need to change parameters in so many places. And that is why we need to get out of these areas to really structure the data and let it flow. And use when I'm missing, if I see that I get in something where we are missing a source, okay, let's generate a source. Is there someone who needs to prove it? Okay, let's recognize that there and send it for someone that needs to review it. But let's really see to that the flow is really manageable based on data, and enable the linguists to do the job, but then let them do the job of actually not post edit. Let them do the job of being the creators of actually content that needs to be cultural bearers. So we manage the data part and the linguistic part and bring them together so that they can create better translations for the many. And I think that as far as I know, I haven't seen this for any LSP yet. And I think that this is really something, a challenge. I mean, they are used to work with the regular TMSs. How do we get them to change? But I think that's a topic for next session, I think.
So
big enough customer usually helps.
So let's then get this, let's be real. This sounds like there is a lot of, there might be development involved. There might be a lot of like technical skills involved in putting together a solution like this, from understanding the requirements to actually executing on that. So who is this for? So who can really go out and afford to get themselves a headless TMS? And maybe we can, you know, I want to leave some time for questions. Maybe we can address at the same time is, where do people get started? Is this something that LSPs are going to be able to support? Is this something that only people on the client side are going to be able to afford? Is it going to be many hundreds of thousands of dollars of development costs to support? What are the options? Who is this for?
Anyone. I mean, for me, it is, I mean, any lock engineer can extract the TMs, put them into database, use the data, create the data around it. Then they probably can create workflows in SharePoint using the built-in solutions that you have, creating the workflow connector in the Office suite. And then see which people should be involved. Then they can probably just send out the documents being collected. So for me, anyone can build it. It's more about how big do you want it to be? Where do you want to start? Make a start. And if you want to make some part where you need to work with OpenAI, yeah, well, go to Hugging Face, borrow a model, test to see where can you implement things. And it won't cost you much. It will cost you 1 or 2 weeks of a lock engineer to at least give you a prototype. So that's my take on it.
So what would be that bare minimum? What can you get done? Tell us a little bit more about in 2 weeks. What would be like a minimum viable version of this?
For me, that the minimal viable version will be that you have the data lake, and you probably have a user interface built in React or built on some low code, and you probably have a workflow if you want it, and you can probably have the metadata set, and you most probably will be able to get an AI model generating content into it. So I think that you will be able to make that in 2 weeks. We might be some overtime, but.
Right.
But it's really, it's not a long shot, and it's not much money you need.
Right. So let's mind that Johan comes from an engineering, right? So I'm gonna go there. You're like very optimistic, but I like it. I like the challenge. Anyone else wants to speak to this?
I think it starts with open linguistic data storage and open linguistic data management, with some structure around it so that it's clear who can access it, why they can access it, and so there is some management of it, so it's not wild, but it makes it available through APIs. It makes it available through APIs. It makes it available for queries. It makes it available for individual translation-oriented tasks. So that can maybe use the data in a generative AI, product or whatever. So it makes the data available for new kinds of things. It has better metadata, so you can find the right stuff. So the data organization and the data setup, I think, is the heart of what you need to do. And then you say, okay, let's pull in everything what people are saying in from Twitter about us. And it's in 20 languages. And so then now you can say, okay, is it possible to analyze this in a way that we understand what the customer thinks about the company? And, so that's a different problem than any localization problem. It's a massive translation task, has to be automated. And then it's plus some NLP stuff around it, like what are the sentiments? What are the positive, elements that come out from this? What are the negative elements? What do we need to address? What do we send to marketing? What do we send to product? What do we send to engineering? And, it's how does this together add up to what the customer feels about the brand, about the company? So I think it's a bigger view of the problem. And if you have a bigger view of the problem, then you say, okay, like what do we need to be able to solve the bigger view? And I think it starts with open access to data that has linguistic value.
So let's pretend that I'm a buyer and that I have like no engineers. So I rely on the expertise from my partners around me. Who do I go and talk to? Is this so Johan? I went and talked to him and he said, just like get yourself an engineer. And he's like, I'm trying, but can't do it quickly enough. And I still want to get started. So where do I go? Whose door do I need to knock on?
Yeah.
Well, you go to people like István, you go to people like Translated, and who have a view of this and who have engaged with customers at this level, where they say, okay, we're trying to solve a problem of providing a better global customer experience. That is the heart of what we're doing. We're not doing translation process management. We're trying to provide a better experience for a global customer. So then you say, okay, what do we need to make that happen? In your business, what are the issues? And where do customers get frustrated? Where is the most friction for a global customer? And then so probably translation will help that. And then what kind of translation? Is it automated? Is it automated plus human, or is it only human? There's some things you have to be completely human. And so then you have the ability to scale and move around this kind of a process. I don't know, and you have elements that say, okay, there's new stuff happening all the time. I'm seeing that, like, for example, I think ChatGPT and these LLMs provide great value for the individual translator. They're much less valuable for the organization because they're harder to automate. They're expensive to implement. They're complicated to implement. But for the individual translator, it helps you clean up the source. It helps you clean up machine translation. It helps you, gives you similes. It gives you, alternatives. So to produce a higher quality translation in general. So there's, you apply the technology that makes most sense in different parts of the translation chain.
What I think is that there is like a need for tinkerers in the industry who are not client driven, because that is the difference between a solution engineer and a tinkerer, that the solution engineer is given an objective, this is what you need to achieve, whereas a tinkerer is able to find and recommend new approaches. Maybe the word is a little bit negative connotation, but I like the word because it's a kind of, there's a lot of possibilities out there. And what is happening is that while a couple of years ago, everything that happened in the translation industry was inside the translation industry. Now a lot of things are happening outside that we don't even know about. What was, for example, a huge, very interesting finding for me is that at BeLazy we are using as a core database technology MongoDB, which is a very well-known NoSQL database. And we've been using that for years, many developers being very, very trained on that. But we didn't know until we had a consultancy with them, we could have read the documentation, of course, that they are offering even fuzzy matching in their search. So they have like a full text search and they are offering fuzzy search, which was so surprising to me, because this is the first time that I hear that it's actually something that we are so used to, and we've been building our own engines. And now you go like mainstream, and the mainstream has built that too. I don't know how it works. I haven't tried it, but I think that we need people who are given the mandate to go out and explore. And they are going to bring the greater good, I believe, because after a while, after failing here and there, they are going to find it, find the right components, because everything is out there. Everything can be replaced. What you need right now is, as opposed to the previous times when you had like a huge system, you need to know what you plug on what interfaces, which is really hard, because this is something that Jan has also mentioned earlier in the open questions, that because of the defined formats and the limitation, loss of metadata and all of this, getting this whole thing on a yarn is really, really hard. But the point is that you need to hammer out those inefficiencies, and those inefficiencies are often not there because the one that developed it wants it to be like that. They're often there because they haven't seen this use case before, and they haven't been able to do those little changes that would enable a seamless workflow. If we don't try, we will never reach there.
All right. So
And to answer your question, Jose, I really, because you don't have any engineers or anything, so I would just wonder, I would not go to anyone. I would ask a friend. And also I would go to ChatGPT and write, I need code for this, and get the code. And then you ask your friend to validate it. Then you take out the data that you have, look at the data, try to understand it and explore it. Learn some Python and see, how can I get the data to work for me? Expand it, put it in a database of yourself, and really start to understand data. And by understanding the data, you can also make it available to others, because then you can speak to people, tell them, I have this data, are you interested? And then you get people to get interested. You can see how you can work together with others. So it's really, for me, this is not a techie thing. You use the technology that's out there and just try to explore. And you can find out yourself what is important to yourself. And then you can ask consultancies, whatever, LSPs, whatever, to ask for help. But I think it's important that you understand by yourself.
I think that you put a lot of trust in me, but I appreciate the thought. I think that it's what I'm hearing is that at least there is like people out there who are already doing this. There is a way to like self-start. It is going to take some work no matter what, but maybe you can start small and also like prove the concept and then get the conversation started. But what I'm taking from the session is that maybe the most important thing is to realize that there is a better way than what you're doing right now, perhaps with your TMS. And that there's already people who are like taking advantage of that, and that to be future proof, you need to know what options you are taking or are ahead of you, or that you are deliberately passing on at the moment. But things are changing, and that we will be seeing more solutions that are like more decoupled. I think that I like the word decouple for what we're describing, right? Data in one place flows to another system, the systems themselves are decoupled. And what I really like about it is that it seems to give flexibility. So thank you so much for the contributions. Let's see if we have any questions from the audience, other than when we can get together for beer, which was a great one.
There are two questions in the Q&A box.
There you go.
Can
So
you see them?
yeah. So Deepak, in case of Headless TMS, do we still need the connectors to connect to content management systems, source repos like GitHub, GitLab, etc.?
It's more of an API question.
Yeah, I think what a headless infrastructure allows you to orchestrate and build new kinds of dynamic workflows. So you need connectors because the data is coming from customer support systems, it's coming from the web, it's coming from chat, it's coming from even maybe voice. So you're pulling data from different places, and you need more than just content management systems. You need where do customers make themselves visible, and you need to be able to connect into all of that, because that's where you want to have translation available.
And the connectors are part of this of the idea of like headless TMS. It's just if your connector runs based on a UI, that may be something that is not necessarily ideal. And if you don't know how to run it and you need that UI, maybe that is a limiting factor that you have right now, right? It's the only way for you to operate a connector is through the UI that you were given in the TMS. That is limiting you.
Yeah.
And also getting away also from built connectors and building your own APIs. And that can be open, that can be low code, it can be whatever, but it's really that you don't trust. Now I'm saying this one, you don't trust the ones that are already pre-built. You build your own, and you can share code on Git or whatever. But really, if you're like if you're using GitHub or GitLab, I mean, there are things that you can make the code available and make requests. That won't be a problem. You just use the APIs.
Absolutely. And one more thing, I mean, what I always say is that we talk about APIs as if they were perfect. They are not perfect, and they are built by developers. And they, as one of my colleagues mentioned once, APIs often do what you can do on the UI, which was like a great way to put it. Like sometimes the thing is that the problem with the connector system, because I have heard a lot of people having issues with that, is not always on the TMS side. There may be openness problems on the other side as well, which makes it harder.
Right.
Thank you. So Jan asked a really good one. So a challenge that that they see with headless systems is that as soon as you create your modules or microservices to transfer data in a given format, you might see that metadata is being lost in the process. And with that context, which is invaluable for translators, whether they're like humans or machines. So definitely we need to make sure that no context is lost. Is this something that can be addressed? Is this something that we're addressing already?
Yes, this is what I call the extra data. When you're able to supplement whatever is mission critical data, just to make the data flow go on. And this is especially very important if in the case of the callbacks and or webhooks, whatever you like to call them, because very often this kind of thing only works if you like in a low code or like a platform automation service. You need to make sure that from one scenario or one little piece of information, you're giving all the information to the other one, because otherwise things get lost over the way. And this is like a real problem. And if it's not an extensible data format that people are using, or they are not using it that way, these components, then a single component of this can make the whole thing fail. I mean, open source is great, because open source in this respect means that you can fix these shortcomings.
Thank you so much. So if we got like 30 more seconds, a minute, if Isa will let us, of course,
Sure.
we have to talk a little bit more about like large language models. Thank you, Isa. Can large language models replace translation management systems / CAT tools? That's a free field for what our thoughts are. And my personal take is that they will be as one more piece in the puzzle, and that the way to maybe look at them is to, I don't know, what do you think?
Yeah,
I think it's a piece of the puzzle. It will probably, we don't know actually, but I think it's a piece in the puzzle.
I mean, what's the difference between a prompt and the terminology? It's both an instruction to use this. So it's kind of like, I think language data as it is not only TMs. It can be corpora, it can be a lot of other things, like prompts can also be, terminology can be, stop lists, stop word lists can also be, which is a prompt as well. So there can be a lot of things, I believe, that can be represented in a more abstract way. TMs are just the big ones.
And I think large language models also help us to extend the reach of people who are focused on translation. It helps us to improve the content creation, to make the content more easy to translate. And then once it's translated through automated means, it helps us clean up and make sure that the quality is improved. So I think it's a way to expand the reach and the focus of people who are involved with translation. So I don't think it's a replacement for real human translation processes or even for machine translation at this point, even though there's times where it's very, very useful. It will not have the automation and reach and breadth and optimization that you need to really do it at scale yet, but it could change.
I think that maybe we can make an easy mistake here, which is if we think as large language models like ChatGPT, if you think about like ChatGPT as an app right now, then you're having a different flavor of a TMS. You're not following this like headless approach. You're not free from the constraints of ChatGPT. It's only if you're going to bring the APIs into your own flow, into your own design, then you will be truly headless. But I hope that people don't expect that even if ChatGPT, there's an opportunity for the people who build ChatGPT to evolve it into a million other things, to create like soup applications that let you maybe translate, maybe review. Who knows? When they've put their sights on the language industry, who knows how they're going to try and take it over. But if we follow them as if we follow any other TMS at the moment, we will not be really freeing ourselves up and giving us this ability to scale up and speed up. I hope that makes sense. Well, thank you so much. I think that we need to leave it here. I really appreciate the conversation. I appreciate the comments on the chat. I appreciate GALA for letting us have this conversation. And I hope that it's, if nothing else, a good starter for look at your own processes and the possibilities. If you're like an LSP, what could you be building or how you could be supporting your customers? If you're a customer, look for that engineer or look for those partners that can help you build this. Learn some code. It never hurts. And, just get started, right? Think that there's other ways that will set you for the future.
Okay. Well, thank you all for the great discussion. I know there's going to be a second part very soon, so be ready. You're going to be back very soon, I suspect. Just for those who are still online, let me announce quickly the next two webinars. So we're going to have on June 15, Sabina Jasinska talking about opportunities for the localization industry.